Each dawn at Edinburgh Castle began with the crack of a steel gauntlet against cold marble. No trumpets, no fanfare, just the king's silent inspection of his court. Any misstep, any whispered glance invited the jagged point of royal displeasure. At first light, courtiers assembled in the great hall's nave, standing in perfect rows before King Alpin IV's raised dais. The hall's soaring arches and tapestries of battlefield triumphs bore witness to an unorthodox ritual. The king himself, clad in iron-coated gloves, paced methodically between the ranks, tapping each noble's breastplate with a measured rhythm. The clang echoed through the vaulted chamber, a reminder that in this fortress perched atop Castle Rock, discipline reigned supreme. It was said that Alpin insisted on this practice to test both composure and posture. A tremor in the hand, a flicker of the eye, or a misaligned cuirass meant days of penance, delivery of bricks to the castle's new curtain wall, or solitary labor in the Hall of Forges. Murmurs claimed the king timed each tap to match his heartbeat, a secret ritual meant to align his courtly ranks with his own unyielding will. Noon brought the Silent Banquet, an affair of opulent restraint. Tables groaned under roasted venison, spiced root vegetables, and flagons of heady claret. Yet no laughter rang out, no toasts were spoken. Instead, each guest received a slate and chalk. When the king nodded, the silence broke only in script, messages of praise, discreet petitions, or coded warnings. One misplaced scribble, a dot too red, a flourish too grand, could be construed as insolence or conspiracy. At table's end, the royal censors collected all slates. Under torchlight in a side chamber, they examined each script meticulously. A single misspelled title, the omission of Your Majesty, or a smudge on the ink could land a lord in the oubliette for a fortnight. The castle buzzed with unspoken fear. Every banquet was both feast and tribunal. When the moon reached its zenith, King Alpin withdrew to his private solar, a chamber lined with battered tomes and battered reliquaries. But nightly audiences were no mere consultations. Instead, the king convened his Midnight Tribunal, attended by 3 anonymous advisors concealed behind iron masks. The chamberlain, sworn to secrecy, stood outside the heavy oaken door, waiting hours for a verdict. Supplicants, nobles, merchants, or even favored scribe apprentices arrived clutching clay-sealed missives. Their petitions ranged from land grants to the king's blessing on marriages. Fewer still sought pardons for whispered rumors of rebellion. Those summoned often emerged at dawn, bearing the weight of royal judgment. Estates stripped, titles revoked, or directives to atone through perilous service. According to one account, in 1602, the merchant Lord Caldwell departed the tribunal a free man, but only after agreeing to fund the king's private artillery experiments for 3 years. More than mere chroniclers, the royal scribes served as the castle's clandestine intelligence arm. Each document they penned harbored invisible annotations, tiny ciphers indicating shifting loyalties, emerging plots, or illicit alliances. The king's favorite scribe, Lady Morgana Sinclair, wielded her quill like a rapier. One errant curl in her calligraphy signaled hidden warnings to loyal observers. It was whispered that Alpin rewarded scribes not for eloquence, but for obscurity. He favored intricate flourishes and ambiguous phrasing that only a select few could decode. Poorly encrypted missives were publicly posted in the castle courtyard, a mark of disgrace for both author and recipient. Through this system, the king maintained mastery over every secret whispered within these stone walls. Beyond the grandeur lay a labyrinth of service passages, sally ports, and unused chapels, ideal for clandestine meetings. In the narrowest tunnels, conspirators carved messages into oak pegs hidden behind faded tapestries. A single vertical slash meant safe, 2 slashes meant gather, and a circle meant danger. These symbols guided plots like the notorious Rose Conspiracy of 1623, in which a faction of disaffected nobles planned to seize the king during a banquet. The plot unraveled when a steward, mistaking a peg riddle for a decorative flourish, read its meaning aloud to his fellow servant. Word reached Lady Sinclair, who transcribed the confession into the king's private ledger. That very night, soldiers in leather armor rounded up the conspirators beneath torchlight. By dawn, the courtyard's scaffold bore 6 bodies. Their names and seals were scraped from every official record. Despite his severity, King Alpin harbored eccentric tastes, mechanical automatons. His royal workshop buzzed with clockwork birds that piped morning melodies, gilded orreries that mapped celestial bodies, and a miniature trumpeting elephant that ambled across polished wood. Once each month, he hosted a Dance of the Gears, inviting a dozen courtiers to marvel at his inventions. Laughter was forbidden. Applause required precise 3-clap patterns so as not to disrupt the mechanisms. Guests who asked too many questions found their notebooks confiscated and inkwells drained. A single sketch taken from the workshop could lead to 3 days of guardhouse confinement. The king valued secrecy above all. No outsider was permitted knowledge of his clockwork marvels, lest the kingdom's ingenious advantage be revealed. Punishment for serious infractions took a darker turn in the lower ward. Here, beneath the ramparts, lay the Oubliette, a narrow pit into which prisoners were lowered in iron cages. Their only sustenance, a leather pouch containing stale bread and rainwater. The king decreed that offenders spend a week there in contemplation before receiving royal clemency or execution. Most emerged gaunt-eyed, their loyalty tested to its breaking point. Local lore spoke of a baron imprisoned for insulting the king's handwriting. So faint was his quill stroke that Alpin accused him of forging documents. Released after a fortnight, the baron never smiled again and lived the rest of his life in somber devotion to the crown. Every year on St. Andrew's Eve, the castle held a rehearsal coronation. This mock ceremony involved the Stone of Destiny transported briefly into the Great Hall. Nobles in gilded robes recited oaths of loyalty, bowed to the assembled court, and partook in a ceremonial sip of mead. The event reinforced social hierarchy. Any misstep in protocol meant demotion in the court's registry. The most humiliating spectacle occurred in 1615 when Lady Beatrice Campbell forgot to kneel before the mead was offered. The mock king, in reality King Alpin's cousin disguised for the ritual, ordered her into the stocks for an hour, a punishment she later claimed taught her the value of stationary humility. The castle's portrait gallery housed dozens of ancestral likenesses, yet among them a handful bore an unusual feature: eyes that seemed to follow visitors, rendered with minute brushstrokes of darker pigment. It was no optical trick, but rather a subtle form of intimidation. The artist, bound by oath, recorded any crumbs of gossip overheard while painting. Courtiers who spoke ill of the king found their words immortalized in paint, literal snitches' eyes that watched intruders. Once, a diplomat from France challenged the authenticity of a portrait and was startled when his own whispered critique was echoed in the gallery by a hush of disapproving attendants. He left in haste, convinced that Edinburgh Castle itself had ears. In a small, locked cabinet within the solar lay King Alpin's private codex, a journal of every slight, betrayal, and act of devotion he had witnessed. Entries ranged from Lord Sinclair's too bold jest regarding the crown to Squire MacFarlane's secret midnight gift of 2 Hudson Bay fox pelts. This codex directed his favors as much as his punishments. Many a noble's rise in rank owed less to battlefield valor and more to a well-timed compliment housed in those vellum pages. Courtiers vied for proximity to the cabinet, some offering bribes, others staging flattering performances in the Solar's alcove. Yet only the king held the key. Hidden behind a curtained screen in the west wing lay the Rose Court, an inner sanctum of no more than 20 nobles hand-picked by King Alpin IV himself. Each member received a single blood-red rose at dawn, its petals preserved in a glass reliquary. To hold a seat in this clandestine assembly was both honor and peril. The court's purpose was to advise the king on matters too delicate for the full council: espionage, dynastic marriages, and the disposition of dissenting nobles. Twice a fortnight, the Rose Court convened beneath flickering lamps on a circular mahogany table. No minutes were kept. Instead, each attendee pressed a thorn into a wax tablet, leaving only a prick to mark their assent. Debate was conducted in whispers. Each phrase weighed as heavily as a declaration of war. Members wore veils of pale silk, concealing expressions lest an unguarded glance reveal more than words. Disagreement could cost a rose. To lose one's token meant expulsion from the court and immediate reassignment to the most thankless of duties: repairing the castle's ancient lead gutters in midwinter under the gaze of hungry ravens. Below the Rose Court's solemn ritual existed an even more covert practice: the secret diet. On the eve of each new season, King Alpin invited a handful of trusted lords and clergy to partake in a nocturnal fast within the chapel of St. Margaret. There, seated on cold stone benches, they endured silence and hunger until dawn. As the sky lightened, they consumed a single bowl of broth infused with rare herbs, chosen not for flavor, but for the way each leaf, crumbling on the tongue, tested resolve. The diet's true purpose was twofold: to temper the privileges of power and to bind participants through shared hardship. Hours spent shivering in the chapel's drafty aisles forged secret oaths stronger than any written treaty. Those who faltered were noted by the king's confessor, see below, and marked as potentially unreliable. Conversely, those who endured gained Alpin's quiet confidence and, at times, the promise of lands long coveted. No castle ritual was complete without the presence of Father Eamon Kerr, the king's confessor. Far from a gentle cleric, Kerr was the monarch's most intimate observer. Each dawn, he led Alpin to a dimly lit oratory off the North Tower. There, the king recited the previous day's triumphs and transgressions, real or imagined, while Kerr took shorthand in a vellum codex. Though cloaked in spiritual duty, Kerr's true loyalty lay with the crown. His confessions shaped the king's judgments, identifying which nobles merited reward or reprimand. Kerr's influence extended beyond the confessional. He maintained a network of informants among the castle servants, stable hands, maids, and even the royal tailor, each sworn to report the smallest indiscretion. A misplaced word, a furtive smile, a glance in the wrong direction, all found their way to Kerr's ears. His codex swelled with such details, granting Alpin a near-omniscient view of court life. Many whispered that Kerr, not the king, was the true power behind Edinburgh Castle's iron rule. Once a year, on the feast of St. Cuthbert's Day, the castle courtyard transformed into an arena for the day of the duel. Rather than private challenges settled in secret, this spectacle was staged for public display, an outlet for grievances and a reminder of martial prowess. Challengers and their opponents donned charcoal-dusted armor and faced each other with rapiers or broadswords under the scrutiny of the entire court. The rules were mercilessly simple. First blood ended the bout, and the loser was required to publicly recant any slander or suspicion they had ever voiced against the victor. Should the fallen duelist refuse, they forfeited a prized possession, land, title, or the agreed-upon sum of gold. The spectacle bolstered the king's authority. By sanctioning these duels, Alpin channeled potential rebellions into ritualized combat, reinforcing his image as ultimate arbiter of honor. Rarely, however, did a duel conclude without further consequence. In 1618, Lady Rosalind Crawford, accused of plotting with disgruntled mercenaries, challenged her accuser, Sir Duncan Wallis. Though she struck first blood, Wallis's riposte drew a deeper wound, leaving her with a permanent scar. Yet her refusal to recant, even after bleeding on the courtyard stones, earned Alpin's grudging respect. Crawford was spared further punishment and later became one of the Rose Court's most feared schemers. By the time the castle bell tolled its 100th anniversary under Alpin's reign, the walls themselves had absorbed every ritual, every whisper, every act of discipline. Visitors spoke not of ghosts or curses, but of the living legacy etched into stone, the echo of iron gauntlets, the hush of the Silent Banquet, the tension of the Midnight Tribunal. Each courtyard and corridor bore the imprint of his reign. When King Alpin IV passed in 1634, his successor chose not to abolish these customs but to adapt them. The Silent Banquet evolved into a more ornate ceremony. Guests still wrote their words, but now on gilded paper with golden quills. The Rose Court opened once to admit wealthy patrons willing to fund the castle's renovations, though membership remained fiercely guarded. The secret diet became the basis for a charitable tradition, with participants donating to the poor at dawn. Yet beneath the veneer of progress lay the same fundamental truth. Edinburgh Castle's power stemmed from its rituals. By codifying discipline, secrecy, and spectacle, the monarchy wove a tapestry of loyalty and fear so intricate that even dissenters found themselves bound by its threads. The castle stood not merely as a fortress of stone, but as a living institution, a crucible in which human ambition, devotion, and treachery were tested in equal measure. Which of these extraordinary customs would you dare to challenge or embrace if you stood within Edinburgh Castle's storied walls? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for our next deep dive into history's most fascinating strongholds.